The night was quiet, but inside her heart Sandra Bullock felt the loud noise of loneliness. She had spent the evening surrounded by flashing lights, cameras, and people who smiled only because the world expected them to. Yet when she returned home, the silence wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. The house was large, filled with everything she could need, but it felt empty. The laughter of the crowd outside had faded, and the applause that once carried her spirit felt far away. She sat on the edge of her couch, staring at the floor, wondering how someone so known by the world could still feel unseen. Sandra had been through storms before. Her life had shown her the beauty of success, but also the weight of expectations. She had given her heart to films, to characters, and to audiences who loved her. But there were nights like this when she questioned if anyone truly knew her beyond the screen. Her smile was her armor. Her kindness was her shield. But inside, she carried a quiet ache that never fully left. She thought about the years when everything felt lighter, when friendship filled the empty spaces. But tonight, it seemed those memories belonged to another life. Then, her phone buzzed softly on the table. She almost ignored it, thinking it was just another message she didn't have the energy to answer. But when she glanced at the screen, her heart paused. It was Keanu. His name alone carried a warmth that broke the silence around her. They had shared a bond for years, a bond built not on fame but on quiet understanding. Keanu was never loud, never demanding. He always seemed to appear at the exact moment when her spirit was most fragile. She opened the message and read slowly. "Hey, just checking in. Are you okay?" The words were simple, but to her they felt like a hand reaching through the darkness. Tears filled her eyes as she held the phone. It wasn't the first time he had done this. Keanu had a way of knowing when someone needed kindness. He had a way of listening, of being present, without asking for anything in return. Before she could reply, another message appeared. This time from Ana de Armas. She hadn't expected it. Ana was younger, full of energy and light, but also someone who carried her own share of hidden struggles. "Hi, Sandra, I was thinking of you tonight. I know we don't talk often, but if you ever need someone, I'm here." Sandra blinked, unable to believe that in the span of minutes, two people had reached out to her. Two people who had no reason to but chose to anyway. Her chest tightened with emotion. She realized she wasn't as alone as she thought. The world outside may not see the whole truth of her heart, but there were people who did. People who respected her not for the fame, but for the person she was. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and allowed herself to breathe deeply for the first time that evening. But just as the comfort began to settle, a memory returned, one that she had tried to bury. It was of a conversation she once had with someone she trusted, a conversation that had left a scar. It was about betrayal, about kindness that was taken for granted. The memory came like a wave, reminding her that people could be cruel too, even when they seemed close. The pain of that past moment clashed with the warmth she now felt from Keanu and Ana. Her heart was caught between believing in kindness and protecting itself from hurt. She stared at her phone again, her hands trembling slightly. Should she open up? Should she let them see the cracks she usually hid? The thought scared her. But deep down, she knew this night was different. The silence that once felt heavy now carried a fragile hope. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky, as if they were quietly cheering for her to take a step forward. Sandra whispered to herself, "Maybe I don't have to carry it all alone." It was a small sentence, but it was the beginning of something larger. This night, marked by a simple message from Keanu and an unexpected note from Ana, would become the first step of a journey she didn't know she needed. A journey of rediscovering not just who she was, but also the strength that comes when people stand beside you. And so, while the world outside continued its noise, inside her heart, a quiet story was beginning, one of respect, resilience, humility, and kindness. The next morning began with the sound of rain tapping against the wide glass windows of Sandra's home. The sky was gray, the kind of color that carried both calm and sorrow, and she sat by the window with a cup of coffee that had already grown cold in her hands. The messages from last night still rested in her phone, unread again after she had locked the screen. She had not replied. She wanted to, but the weight of honesty held her back. It was not easy to admit when loneliness touched her heart. People looked at her and believed she had everything: success, recognition, and a life that others dreamed of. But the truth was far more complicated. Success did not protect anyone from emptiness. She stared out at the falling rain, wondering if replying to Keanu and Anna would open a door she wasn't ready to walk through. Her mind kept circling around one question: why now? Why did both of them reach out to her at the same moment? It felt more than coincidence. It felt like life was giving her a chance to confront something she had been running away from for years: the fear of letting people see her vulnerable side. She finally picked up the phone and opened Keanu's message again. She typed a few words, erased them, typed again, and then stopped. Nothing felt right. How do you tell someone that the silence inside your heart feels louder than the applause outside? How do you explain that you can be surrounded by thousands and still feel unseen? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Keanu. I'm in town for a few days. Would you like to meet? Maybe just for coffee. No cameras. No pressure. Her hand trembled as she read it. Keanu had always been gentle with his words. He knew how to offer presence without forcing it. Sandra placed the phone down and closed her eyes. Her mind pulled her into memories of the past. The time they worked together, the moments of laughter behind the scenes, the times when silence between them felt comfortable instead of heavy. She remembered how Keanu always gave space but never left completely. He had been one of the rare souls in her life who respected boundaries while still proving his care. Yet fear whispered again. What if meeting him meant she had to show the parts of herself she kept hidden? What if he saw the cracks too clearly? The thought unsettled her. But just as the fear grew, another vibration came. This time it was Anna. Good morning, Sandra, the message read. I know it might sound strange, but last night I felt something. Like you needed someone to remind you that you matter outside of the spotlight. Maybe one day soon we can meet, even just for a walk. I believe the quietest talks sometimes heal the loudest wounds. Those words touched her deeply. Anna was young but spoke with wisdom that came from her own storms. Sandra felt something shift inside. Perhaps it was time to stop hiding behind the polished smile. Perhaps it was time to let kindness in again. Later that afternoon, the rain slowed to a drizzle. The sky opened just enough to let soft light fall through. Sandra looked in the mirror before leaving her house. She wore no makeup, no glamorous dress, just herself, simple and human. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she stepped into her car and drove to a quiet cafe that Keanu had suggested. The cafe was small, hidden on a side street where few people noticed. The sound of jazz music drifted inside, mixed with the aroma of warm bread. When she entered, her eyes immediately found him. Keanu sat in the corner, leaning slightly forward, his hands wrapped around a simple mug of tea. He looked up and smiled, not the kind of smile that demanded attention, but the kind that welcomed her without words. You came, he said softly as she sat across from him. She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. I almost didn't. But you did, he replied, his tone filled with quiet strength. That's what matters. For a moment, silence hung between them, not heavy this time, but waiting. She wanted to speak, but didn't know where to begin. It was Keanu who finally leaned back, his eyes steady. I don't need you to say anything you're not ready for. I just want you to know you're not alone. You've given so much light to people through your work, through your kindness. And even when you feel empty, that light is still inside you. Sometimes you just need someone to remind you. Her eyes filled with tears, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed. But Keanu did not move closer, did not push her. He simply let her be, and in that space, she felt safe. When she finally found her voice, it was softer than she expected. Keanu, do you ever feel like the world only sees the surface of you? Like no one really knows the whole story? He paused, his face thoughtful. All the time. But I've learned something. The people who matter don't need the whole story to stand by you. They just need to know your heart. And your heart, Sandra, speaks louder than any script, louder than any stage. His words sank deep, breaking something inside her that had been locked away. She realized then that opening up wasn't weakness. It was courage. As they spoke quietly, she noticed the cafe door open again. A familiar face walked in, Anna. Sandra blinked in surprise. Keanu looked at her and smiled knowingly, as if he had expected this. Anna approached their table, her expression warm but cautious. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I thought maybe it would be good if we could all talk." Sandra felt her chest tighten with emotion. Two people from different places in her life, standing before her with nothing to gain and everything to give. In that moment, she felt something she had not felt in a long time, a fragile but undeniable sense of belonging. What she didn't know was that this meeting, simple as it seemed, would soon lead to a journey filled with trials, hidden truths, and choices that would test them all. The rain outside had stopped, but a storm much deeper was only beginning to rise. The cafe had grown quieter as the afternoon stretched on. The rain had stopped, leaving behind streets that glistened like glass under the dim light. Sandra sat with Keanu and Anna, the three of them forming a small circle in the corner of the cafe. At first, the silence between them felt like a fragile thread, uncertain and waiting. But then, without planning, Sandra spoke. "I didn't realize how much I needed this," she said softly. Her voice trembled, but it carried honesty. To just sit, without cameras, without pretending. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes calm, his presence steady. "You don't have to pretend here. Not with us." Anna nodded gently. "People always expect us to be perfect. But no one is perfect. I think the bravest thing we can do is to show we're human too." Those words struck Sandra harder than she expected. It was rare for her to hear such truth spoken so openly. She had spent years building walls around her heart, afraid of letting people see the fragile side of her. But now, here in this small cafe, she felt those walls shaking. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe she didn't have to carry everything alone. Maybe it was okay to let others stand beside her. But before she could sink into the comfort of that thought, something unexpected happened. As the three of them continued their quiet conversation, Sandra noticed a man at the counter watching them closely. His gaze lingered, not curious like a stranger's, but sharp, almost searching. She felt her chest tighten. Had he recognized them? Was he a journalist? The thought filled her with unease. She leaned closer to Keanu and whispered, "Someone's watching us." Keanu didn't turn his head right away. Instead, he calmly lifted his cup, took a sip, and then glanced subtly at the man. His eyes narrowed slightly, but his face remained calm. "I see him," he said quietly. Anna's brows furrowed. "Do you think he's press?" "Maybe," Keanu replied. "Or maybe something else." The unease spread through Sandra's chest. She hated the idea of her private moments being turned into headlines. She hated the idea of her vulnerability being sold to the highest bidder. She tried to focus on the warmth of the people beside her, but the shadow of the stranger's gaze made it difficult. Keanu placed his mug down gently. "If you want, we can leave. There's a quieter place I know nearby. No one will bother us there." Sandra hesitated, but then nodded. She didn't want the moment to be ruined. She wanted to hold on to this rare feeling of being understood. They stood and walked out together. The man at the counter shifted slightly, his eyes following them as they left. Sandra felt a chill run down her spine, but Keanu's steady presence at her side and Anna's supportive glance kept her from turning back. The air outside smelled of wet pavement and earth. Keanu led them down a narrow side street where the sound of traffic faded and the world felt quieter. He guided them toward a small bookshop with warm lights glowing through the windows. Inside, the scent of old pages and wood filled the air. "I come here when I need peace," Keanu said softly. "The owner doesn't care about fame. He cares about people." The shop felt like a sanctuary. Rows of books stretched around them, and the quiet hum of a soft record played in the background. They moved to a corner where an old lamp cast golden light across a worn leather couch. Sandra sank into the couch, her body releasing tension she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu sat across from her, his expression calm but his eyes carrying a weight of their own. Anna sat beside Sandra, her hand lightly resting on Sandra's arm, a gesture of solidarity. For a while, they spoke about ordinary things, books, music, simple memories. It felt safe, almost normal. But then Keanu broke the silence with a question Sandra had not expected. "Sandra, When was the last time you let yourself be cared for? The question hit her deeply. She tried to answer, but no words came. Her throat tightened and her eyes filled with tears. She realized she couldn't even remember. She had always been the strong one, the one who carried others, the one who smiled when the cameras demanded it. But when had she last allowed herself to be fragile? Anna leaned closer. "It's okay," she said softly. "You don't have to be strong all the time. Sometimes the strongest thing is to let others hold you when you're tired." Sandra closed her eyes, the tears finally spilling. She let them fall, not caring if they were seen. And as she cried, she felt Keanu and Anna's quiet presence surround her, not with pity but with respect. They didn't try to fix her. They didn't rush her. They simply stayed, steady and kind. But just as Sandra began to feel a sense of release, her phone buzzed in her bag. She wiped her eyes and pulled it out, her heart skipping when she saw the name. It was someone from her past, someone tied to the very betrayal she had buried deep inside. The message was short, but sharp. "We need to talk. I know what you've been hiding." Her breath caught. The room around her seemed to blur, and the safe warmth of the bookshop turned suddenly heavy. Keanu noticed her expression change. "What is it?" he asked gently. Sandra stared at the screen, her fingers trembling. The past she thought she had left behind was now knocking at her door again. Anna looked at her with worry. "Sandra, what happened?" She closed her eyes, her chest tightening. "Something I thought I would never have to face again." In that moment, she realized that the loneliness she had been drowning in wasn't just about being unseen. It was also about the secrets she carried, the truths she had locked away, afraid of the damage they might bring. And now, those truths were threatening to break free. What she didn't know was that Keanu and Anna's presence in her life had arrived at the exact time she would need them most. For the storm she had feared was no longer in the distance. It had already begun to rise. Sandra stared at the glowing screen of her phone, her hands cold, despite the warmth of the bookshop around her. The words repeated in her mind like an echo she couldn't silence. "We need to talk. I know what you've been hiding." Each letter cut deeper, pulling her back into memories she had spent years trying to bury. She locked the phone quickly, as though shutting it off could erase what she had just seen. But her chest still ached, and the tremble in her fingers refused to stop. Keanu's voice broke the silence. "Sandra, you don't have to carry that alone. Whatever it is, we're here." She looked up at him, his calm eyes steady, his tone without judgment. For a moment she wanted to tell him everything, to let it spill out like rain after a storm. But fear held her back. What if they saw her differently? What if her truth damaged the fragile trust she had only just begun to rebuild with them? Anna leaned forward, her hand still lightly resting on Sandra's arm. "You don't have to explain right now," she said softly. "But don't shut us out. You don't deserve to fight whatever this is in silence." The compassion in their words pressed against the wall around her heart. She nodded slowly, though her lips stayed sealed. To shift the heavy mood, Keanu suggested they take a walk. "Sometimes the world feels less heavy when you're moving," he said. And so the three of them left the shop, stepping into streets now washed clean by the rain. The air smelled fresh, carrying the scent of earth and flowers revived by the storm. They walked side by side, their footsteps soft against the pavement. The city around them moved with its usual rhythm, cars passing, people rushing. But within their small circle it felt different, like they were moving through their own quiet path. As they turned a corner, a street musician played a slow tune on a violin. The melody floated in the damp air, haunting and beautiful. Sandra stopped for a moment, listening. The music stirred something inside her, a memory of a night long ago, when someone she trusted had spoken promises that later turned into betrayal. Her eyes stung with tears, and she quickly turned her head away. But Keanu noticed. He didn't speak. He didn't press. He just stayed beside her, walking at her pace, letting the music pass like a wave. Anna finally broke the silence. "Sandra, can I tell you something? When I was younger, I thought the hardest part of life would be failure. But I learned it's not. The hardest part is when people betray your kindness. It makes you doubt everything, yourself, your worth, your ability to trust. But I also learned that the only way to heal is to let the right people stand beside you." People who don't just want your smile but also accept your tears. Those words pierced Sandra's heart. She wanted to believe them. She wanted to believe that healing was possible, that she could face the shadows of her past without breaking. But before she could reply, her phone buzzed again. Another message appeared. This one harsher. You can't run forever. Meet me tomorrow or I'll tell the world. Her breath caught. Her steps faltered. Keanu immediately reached out, steadying her by the arm. What happened? She showed them the message, her hands trembling as she passed the phone. Keanu's jaw tightened as he read it, his usual calm giving way to a quiet seriousness. Anna's face filled with concern. Who is this? Anna asked carefully. Sandra's lips parted, but no words came at first. She felt the weight of years pressing down, the fear of letting them see her most fragile truth. But finally, with a shaky voice, she whispered, Someone I trusted once. Someone who knows things I wanted to keep buried. Buried things have a way of finding the surface, Keanu said gently. But if this person is threatening you, then it's not your burden alone anymore. Let us help you. His certainty startled her. She wasn't used to anyone offering to share her battles. She had carried them in silence for so long, it felt almost unnatural to imagine otherwise. They walked further until they reached a quiet park. The lamps glowed softly, casting golden halos on the wet ground. Benches lined the paths, still damp from the rain. They sat together, the three of them facing the open space where the sound of water dripping from trees filled the air. Sandra finally spoke, her voice low. Years ago, I trusted someone with my heart. I believed their words, their promises, but they weren't who they seemed. When the truth came out, it nearly broke me. I hid it because the world didn't need to know, and I wanted to protect what little peace I had left. But they know everything, and now they're using it against me. Anna's hand tightened on hers. That's not peace, Sandra. That's a wound you've been forced to cover. Keanu's eyes held a quiet fire. And no one deserves to have their pain turned into someone else's weapon. For the first time in years, Sandra let herself speak of the betrayal. She didn't give every detail, but enough for them to understand the weight she carried. Her voice cracked, her tears fell, but she kept going, because for once, she didn't feel alone in the telling. When she finished, silence surrounded them. Not the heavy silence of loneliness, but the respectful silence of people holding space for her truth. Keanu finally spoke. Whatever happens tomorrow, you won't face it alone. If they want to bring the past into the light, then let it come. You'll stand stronger with people beside you. And we'll be there, Anna nodded firmly. We'll be there, together. Sandra's chest ached with both fear and relief. Fear of what the morning might bring, but relief that she no longer had to stand at the edge of it by herself. She looked at them, two people who owed her nothing, yet chose to stand with her. In their eyes, she saw not pity but respect. Not distance, but closeness. The storm inside her hadn't ended, but for the first time, she felt she had shelter. What she didn't realize was that tomorrow's meeting would reveal not just painful memories, but a truth none of them expected, one that would test the limits of trust, kindness, and resilience in ways they could not yet imagine. The morning of the meeting arrived too quickly. Sandra had barely slept. She had spent the night turning over memories like fragile glass, each one cutting deeper the more she tried to hold it. Her phone sat on the table beside her, the last message still glowing in her mind. Meet me tomorrow, or I'll tell the world. She stared at the clock as the minutes crawled forward. Her chest tightened with each passing second. Part of her wanted to cancel, to run, to hide. But another part of her, tired of silence, tired of fear, knew that it was time to face what she had been avoiding. When she finally stepped out of her house, the air was sharp with morning chill. The streets still carried the quiet of early hours, but inside her heart there was no calm. Keanu was waiting for her outside in a modest car, his posture calm, his presence steady as always. Anna sat in the back seat, her eyes filled with quiet determination. You don't have to do this alone, Keanu said as she slid into the car. I know, she whispered, though fear still trembled in her voice. But I don't know if I'm ready for what's waiting. No one is ever ready, Anna said softly. but we get through it step by step, together. They drove through the city in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound. Sandra stared out the window, watching the world blur by. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap, her breath uneven. Keanu reached over, not to hold her hand, but to place his palm gently against her arm, a wordless reassurance. They arrived at a small cafe on the edge of town, the place the message had instructed. Sandra felt her stomach tighten as she stepped out. The building looked ordinary, but to her it felt like the gates of something far heavier. Inside, the cafe was dim, the air carrying the smell of bitter coffee. In the far corner, a man sat waiting. His presence pulled her instantly into the past. His hair was thinner now, his face older, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't changed. It was the same sharpness that once charmed her and later cut her. Her steps faltered. Keanu moved slightly closer, steady as a shield. Anna walked on her other side, silent but firm. Together they crossed the room until they stood before him. "You came," the man said with a smirk. His voice was smooth, but underneath it was a blade. "What do you want?" Sandra asked, her voice low, her strength hidden beneath trembling breath. He leaned back, folding his arms. "I want the truth, or maybe I want the world to have it. Depends on how you respond." Her heart pounded. "You've already taken enough from me." "Why now?" His eyes darkened. "Because the past doesn't stay buried, and you know it. You thought you could hide it forever, but the world deserves to know who you really are." Keanu's calm voice cut through. "No, what you want is power. This isn't about truth. It's about control." The man's smirk faltered slightly, but he recovered. "And who are you to speak for her?" Keanu's steady gaze didn't waver. "Someone who stands beside her when others try to break her." Anna leaned forward, her voice firm but compassionate. "If you think hurting her will heal your own wounds, you're wrong. Pain doesn't heal pain." The man's expression shifted for just a moment, as if her words pierced through the armor. But then his jaw tightened again. "You don't know what she kept from you. She's not as innocent as she looks." Sandra's chest ached. The shame she had carried for so long pressed against her ribs, demanding to be spoken. Her lips trembled as she finally whispered, "Stop." The man looked at her, satisfied. "So you're finally ready?" She closed her eyes. She could feel Keanu's calm presence beside her, Anna's unwavering support on the other side. And in that moment, she realized something. The fear that had controlled her all these years wasn't about the truth itself. It was about facing it alone. But she wasn't alone anymore. Her voice shook, but it rose stronger than before. "If you want the world to know, then let them. I'm done hiding. I've made mistakes. I've been hurt. I've carried shame. But none of that gives you the right to control me anymore." The man blinked, caught off guard. The silence stretched, heavy but shifting. Keanu spoke softly but with conviction. "You lost your hold on her the moment she stopped being afraid." The man's smirk faded completely. For the first time, his confidence cracked. He leaned forward, his voice sharper now. "You think this is over?" "It's not. There are things you don't know, Sandra. Truths that will hurt you more than anything I could ever say. And when they come out, we'll see who still stands by you." His words sent a shiver down her spine. She didn't know if it was an empty threat or a hidden reality waiting to surface. But before she could speak, he stood, tossed some coins onto the table, and walked out, leaving behind a silence heavier than his presence. Sandra sat frozen, her chest heaving. She felt both lighter and heavier at once. Lighter because she had spoken against him, heavier because his final words carried a shadow she couldn't yet name. Anna touched her hand gently. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Keanu nodded, his eyes steady. "And remember this, shadows only look big until you stand in the light." Sandra leaned back, tears burning in her eyes. The confrontation was over, but the story was far from finished. She had faced the past, but now the future carried questions she didn't yet have the strength to answer. And deep down, she knew the man was right about one thing. There were truths still waiting in the dark. Truths that could either shatter her or set her free. The cafe felt colder after the man left, as though he had taken the warmth with him. Sandra sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly on the table, her breath uneven. The echo of his words refused to fade. There are things you don't know, truths that will hurt you more than anything I could ever say. Her mind swirled with fear. She had faced him, but instead of closure, he had left a new shadow in her path. Keanu leaned closer, his voice calm but firm. Don't let his words poison your heart. People like that feed on fear. The more you carry it, the more power you give them. Sandra nodded faintly, though the fear still pressed against her chest. What if he's right? What if there really are things waiting in the dark? What if I'm not as strong as I think? Anna squeezed her hand gently. Strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about standing back up when you do. Even if there are more truths, even if they hurt, you don't have to face them alone. Those words settled in her heart, soft yet powerful. She wanted to believe them. She wanted to let herself lean on others. But her past had taught her that trust was dangerous. She had spent years protecting her own wounds, afraid of letting anyone too close. That night, back at her home, Sandra sat by the window again. The city glowed outside, lights sparkling like distant stars. But her thoughts were restless. She picked up her phone and, almost against her will, opened her old emails. Deep in the archive, she found messages from the man who had threatened her. And as she read through them, her hands shook. Not because of his words, but because of something she had forgotten. Hidden in those exchanges was a detail she had overlooked years ago. It wasn't only about betrayal. It was about someone else who had been involved, someone she had trusted deeply. Her chest tightened as she realized that the man's threat hadn't been an empty bluff. There really was a truth she hadn't faced. The next morning, she called Keanu and Anna to her home. They sat in her living room, the three of them surrounded by quiet. Sandra laid the old emails on the table. I need to show you something, she whispered. As they read, Keanu's eyes narrowed and Anna's lips parted in shock. The emails revealed that someone Sandra had once called a friend had been tied to the betrayal all along. Someone she had defended for years, someone who had pretended to protect her while secretly standing against her. Sandra's voice broke. I thought I was only hiding shame. But the truth is, I was hiding from the fact that I trusted the wrong people. I couldn't face it. So I buried it. And now it's here again. Keanu's voice was steady, his words sharp but kind. Betrayal doesn't define who you are, Sandra. It defines who they are. And the fact that you survived it, that you kept moving, that you still gave kindness to the world, that shows more strength than any lie they ever told. Anna added softly, You didn't lose by trusting. They lost by breaking it. You can't blame yourself for giving your heart. It's what makes you human. Tears streamed down Sandra's face. She felt exposed, fragile, yet strangely lighter. The truth she had hidden was no longer locked inside her. It was here in the open, and yet she was not broken. She was still standing. That evening, they walked together through the city streets. The sunset painted the sky with golden light, washing everything in warmth. Sandra breathed deeply, the air filling her lungs in a way it hadn't in years. She looked at Keanu and Anna, their faces glowing in the fading sun. Thank you, she whispered, for standing with me when I couldn't stand alone. Keanu gave her a gentle smile. You don't owe us thanks. This is what friendship is. Standing in the storm with someone until the light comes back. Anna nodded, her eyes shining. And you've given so much to others, Sandra. Now it's your turn to receive. They continued walking, their footsteps steady, their presence strong. Sandra realized something then. Loneliness had not come from being unseen by the world, but from not allowing herself to be seen by the few who truly cared. And now, with Keanu and Anna beside her, she finally let herself be seen. The storm of betrayal, the weight of secrets, the shadow of fear. It all still existed, but no longer in silence, and that made all the difference. In the weeks that followed, the man who had threatened her tried again to stir trouble, but his words no longer held the same power. When he spoke, Sandra no longer trembled. She had faced the past. She had spoken her truth, and she had found strength not in hiding, but in connection. And slowly, piece by piece, the loneliness that once filled her home began to fade. The laughter of friends, the warmth of honest conversations. the quiet comfort of being understood. These became her new armor. One evening, as she sat with Keanu and Anna in that same small bookshop, Sandra looked at them and said softly, "I thought my story was about loss. But now I see it's about resilience. And resilience isn't built alone, it's built together." The golden lamp above them cast light across their faces. Keanu lifted his cup in quiet agreement. Anna smiled, her hand resting lightly on Sandra's arm. And in that simple moment, Sandra realized something she had needed to hear all along. She was not alone, and she never had to be again. The shadows of her past had not disappeared, but they no longer controlled her. She had walked through them and stepped into the light, with friends who had proven that kindness, respect, and resilience could heal even the deepest wounds. And for the first time in a long time, Sandra felt free.